So here it points out at Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, how the sons of God were the ones who came to earth, and also how the sons of God are spirit beings, the ones that were spoken of that Jesus was talking to, that preached to. So in Noah's time, spirit beings came from heaven and materialized themselves to have bodies of flesh so that they can have relationships with the daughters of men. First Peter chapter 3, verse 18 points out, it's verse 19 where it says, "And in this state he went and preached to the spirits in prison." And those spirits Jesus preached to were the angels. So yes, it is more than one spirit being in heaven. God is a spirit, so is Jesus, and so are the angels. The form of God is a spirit, and the form of angels are a spirit also. That's why they're spirits. They're called spirits because the form is a spiritual being. Now, how many? Are there many multiple angels? Well, the Bible points out how God, the Heavenly Father, is a spirit, and He created all other spiritual beings. So all the other angels are spirits that exist in God's form also. It's not just Jesus or the Word that exists as being in God's form. There are many different other spiritual beings in heaven that exist in God's form. The Word is one of them. He's one of the spiritual beings in heaven that exist in God's form. So are all the other ones. At Revelation chapter 5, verse 11, it points out how John speaks about how there are thousands on top of thousands of spiritual beings, angels in heaven. John says, "And I saw and I heard the voice of many angels around the throne, and the living creatures, and the elders, and the number of them was myriads of myriads, and thousands of thousands." So John pointed out how there are many angels, thousands of thousands, and they're powerful. Angels are powerful beings, and they're not from Earth. They're actually aliens because they don't originate from Earth. So Jesus is not the only one that exists in heaven in God's form as a spiritual being. There are many angels that exist in God's form as spiritual persons. And angels are not originally from Earth. Now, what makes Jesus, why is he called the begotten? Well, at Colossians, it points out a point how Jesus It says in Colossians chapter 1 verse 15, it says, he is the image of the invisible God. So that points out how God is invisible. And also how Jesus reflects God's likeness. That's why it says image. The meaning of image, it means likeness when you look it up in the dictionary. He is the likeness, reflection of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. So the Word is the firstborn of all creation. And further on in Colossians chapter 1, verse 18, it says, he is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. Because when Jesus died and when he was resurrected as a spiritual being, went to heaven, so that he might become the one who is first in all things. But the point of this verse is this mainly. I'm highlighting. He is the beginning. That's the key point. He's the beginning of the first creation. At Hebrews chapter 1, verse 6, it also says how it says, but when he, referring to God, again brings his firstborn. Now, why is he called firstborn? Because Jesus was created first and God put life into him so that he can be called the firstborn. That's why at John chapter 1 verse 18 it says the only begotten God. He's the only begotten God because the Heavenly Father didn't have no help creating the Word. He's the only being that was created single-handedly from God. Now, the Word did help God create everything else besides himself. So that's why he's called the only begotten God. Because he's unique. He's the only one that was created by the Heavenly Father single-handedly, without assistance. At Proverbs chapter 8 verse 22, it actually speaks about the Word speaking. It reads, Jehovah, who is the name of the Heavenly Father, Jehovah produced me as the beginning of his way, the earliest of his achievements of long ago. From ancient times I was installed, from the start, from times earlier than the earth. Now I'm going to stop right there. So here, the Word is actually pointing out the same information Jesus points out, how he existed before the earth. And he goes into detail, a lot more detail. And in verse 31, he says, I rejoiced over his habitable earth, and I was especially fond of the sons of men. So when the Word was in heaven in the God form, as a spiritual being, he was fond of the sons of men. Now, in Daniel's time, and this is before the Word was sent to earth in the flesh, in Daniel's time, Daniel speaks about how he saw someone and how this spiritual being, his face had the appearance of lightning. His eyes were like fiery torches. So keep that in mind. His eyes were like fiery torches. His eyes were like fiery torches. That's what Daniel said. And at Revelation chapter 2, verse 18, the B part, it says, these are the things that the Son of God says, comma, the one, that's very important, the one who has eyes like a fiery flame. So here it identifies that who Daniel saw was the Word before he was sent to earth in the flesh. He came down as a spiritual being as an assignment in his God form before he was sent down to earth. And that's how Daniel describes him. Just like that, having eyes of fire. So this word, the Word, was God's first creation. That's why, and he also existed in God's form as a spiritual being before he was sent to earth later on. He's with his spiritual family first. At Philippians chapter 2, verse 6, it says how Jesus was existing in God's form as a spiritual being with his spiritual family in heaven. That's why now we can read the whole thing so it can connect all the dots. In the beginning was the Word. Why was the Word in the beginning? Because he was the beginning of all creation, the firstborn of all creation. So he would be in the beginning. And the Word was with. The key word here is with. The Word was with God. And the Word was a God. Meaning he was not of the flesh. He was a spiritual being. Now, here it points out, this one, the Word, was in the beginning with God. So it clearly makes it very clear, multiple times, that this one, or the Word, was with God. This one was in the beginning with God. And then it says, all things came into existence through him, and apart from him, not even one thing came into existence. What has come into existence by means of him was life. So here it's pointing out very clear how he was a master worker. It says, all things came into existence through him. So he had a hand at assisting God create everything, including his spiritual brothers. That's why he is pointed out as the only begotten God, because he's not of the flesh, and he's the first one the Heavenly Father created before he created his brothers. Later on, see, at John chapter 1, verse 14, it says, so the Word became, the key word is became. So the Word became flesh and resided among us. So before the Word became flesh, the Word was a begotten God. That, as Philippians chapter 2, verse 6 points out, he was existing in God's form before he became flesh. So it's very important to see those key points. The Word was existing in God's form. The key word is was.